today, Lesson 30. To start this lesson, you should read through the first 2 pages of your booklet, pages 349 and 350, on the subject of syncopation. You're already familiar with the pattern of stressed and unstressed beats that you usually get in various time signatures. You know, for instance, that in 2/4 time, the first beat is strong and the second weak, like a military march. 1, 2, 1, 2. In 3/4 time, the first beat alone is stressed, giving you the rhythm of a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And 4/4 time has 2 stressed beats in each bar, the first and third. The first is the strongest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You also know that each beat in common time can be subdivided into 2, a downbeat and an upbeat, with the stress normally falling on the first subdivision, the downbeat. 1 and 2 and down, up. But in syncopated music, like almost all jazz for instance, the rhythmic stress is shifted, so that it falls on, say, the last beat of the bar in 3/4 time, or the second beat in 4/4, or on the upbeat instead of the normal downbeat. In fact, you've already played a good deal of syncopated music in this course, although you may not have known it. Let's listen to the 6 examples of syncopation on page 350. Here's example A. Example B. Example C, with the stress on the upbeat instead of the downbeat. Now, example D. Example E in 6/8 time. And finally, example F. Now, let's look at what a touch of syncopation can do to the 4 bars of music at the top of page 351. Here's this little musical phrase in its original form. And now, here it is with the 2 E's played half a beat early, as the last quavers of the first and third bars. To add to the effect, we'll play the first notes of the first and third bars a quaver late, on the upbeat, rather than the downbeat. Filling in the harmony, the final result could sound like this. This is the sort of syncopation, slightly anticipating or delaying a note, that performers of jazz or light music use all the time to give their playing a rhythmic lift. But you mustn't think that syncopation is confined to modern music. Our solo piece for this lesson, Boccherini's famous Minuet, was composed back in the 18th century, yet its main tune is an excellent example of syncopated rhythm. Notice how in the first complete bar of the piece, the 2 stressed notes in the right hand, indicated by accent marks, come a quaver after the first and second beats. This syncopation helps give the music its attractive lilt. Let's listen to the minuet now. And don't let the repeats confuse you, by the way. The first section is played twice. Then, when we get to the end of page 353, we go back to the first double bar line at the top of the previous page and play through again, including the repeat, up to the word fine, the end. Boccherini's Minuet. You'll probably find this minuet quite tricky to play at first, but you'll manage it all right, as long as you practice properly, starting slowly and with the two hands separately. The fingering is very carefully worked out to give the best possible effect, so do follow it exactly as it's written. It's important to try to bring out the contrast between legato and staccato, which gives the piece a lot of its flavour. You'll find there are quite a few staccato repeated notes, to be played with changing fingers. They crop up in the right hand in bars 5 and 6, for example. It might be a good idea to go back briefly to lesson 11 and run through exercises 105 to 112, which cover that point of technique. Whatever you do, don't miss the change of key signature halfway through. The F sharp disappears at the last bar of the first line of music on page 353. Although it comes back, of course, for the repeat of the first section. Back in lesson 28, you were introduced to the 7th chords. Now it's time to start looking in a bit more detail at the way they're used, the way they fit together into sequences that make sense to the ear. We'll begin on page 354 with a look at how the dominant 7th relates to the tonic chord. They're very often found together. You'll remember that the tonic chord is the basic chord on the first note of the scale. In C major, for instance, it's C, E and G. If you're playing a piece in C, it's very likely to begin with a C major chord and almost certain to end with one. This is because the tonic chord gives a sense of stability, of having come to rest. If you end on any other chord, the piece may sound unfinished, like stopping in mid-sentence. Now, the dominant 7th has a very close relationship with the tonic chord. We saw in lesson 28 that the dominant 7th is the 7th chord on the 5th degree of the scale. So, for instance, in C major, it's the chord G, B, D and F. The dominant seventh is often referred to simply as a 7 chord, as in G7 or F7. This dominant seventh is a very unstable chord. It can't stand on its own. It's full of tension that needs to be resolved. And it resolves most naturally onto the tonic chord. Listen to the pairs of chords in exercise 324, and you'll hear how each time the dominant seventh relaxes onto the tonic, almost with a sigh of relief. In that exercise, and all the ones that follow, you should of course practice with the left hand as well as the right, playing an octave lower and following the fingering written beneath the notes. It's very important to get the feel of moving easily from chord to chord with either hand, especially in a very common combination like the dominant and tonic, which you'll come across all the time. A chord that fits very comfortably in front of the dominant seventh is the minor seventh on the second degree of the scale. In C major, that would be D, F, A and C. Exercise 325 presents this very common sequence of 3 chords, the supertonic seventh, the dominant seventh and tonic, in the form of arpeggios. Notice the changes of key signature in this exercise, by the way. Exercise 325. You know that a 7th chord is made up of 4 notes, a root note, a 3rd, a 5th and a 7th. But playing a 4-note chord can be very cumbersome at times. Fortunately, it's perfectly all right to cut a dominant 7th chord down to 3 notes by taking out either the 3rd or the 5th. So G7 can be played as G, D and F, that is without the 3rd, or as G, B and F, without the 5th. In exercise 326, all the dominant 7th chords are minus the 3rd. And now exercise 327. Here the 7 chords are lacking the 5th. Exercise 328 will get you to play dominant seventh chords as arpeggios across 2 octaves, using the thumb-under technique. This is not at all easy, so start by practicing very slowly at first. The irregular distances between the notes create problems. You'll find you need to stretch your fingers wide in some places, but not in others. Still, don't be put off if you make a few mistakes at first. It's all excellent practice. Exercise 328. On page 357, there's a summary of the dominant seventh chords in their 4 inversions, which you can look over at your leisure and refer to if the need arises. You'll notice that the chords with a black key as their root note are given both their possible alternative names, D-flat 7 and C-sharp 7, for instance. Obviously, the C-sharp 7 chord would be written differently, with sharps instead of flats, but it's identical on the keyboard. Our piece with backing orchestra for this lesson is Mr. Smith, a lively number marked to be played in a boogie tempo. It's worth taking a look at the way this piece is put together. If you ignore the first 4 bars, which provide an introduction, you'll find that the rest of the music breaks down into sections 12 bars long. In fact, it's basically a 12-bar blues. There are 6 12-bar sections, if you include the repeat on the first page. 5 of them have exactly the same sequence of chords. 4 bars of the tonic C, 2 bars of the subdominant F, another 2 bars of C, 1 bar of the dominant G, another bar of F, and back to the tonic for the last 2 bars. The exception is the 12-bar section at the top of page 360, and even that is only slightly different. A repetitive 12-bar structure is very common in this sort of music. If you can memorize the chord sequence for the basic 12 bars, you'll find it makes the piece easier to play and also puts you in a position to improvise, using the same bass but inventing your own notes over the top. Anyway, let's listen to the piece first as a keyboard solo, played at a fairly moderate speed. Mr. Smith. Perhaps the best way to start playing this piece is to learn the left-hand part by heart. It's not that difficult, really, because, as we've already seen, the bass virtually repeats itself every 12 bars, although you'll have to watch out for the places where it varies slightly, especially on the last page. There are some very low notes on ledger lines beneath the bass stave that you need to recognise. In the third bar of the piece, the note 4 spaces below the stave is a G. This bottom G crops up again several times. Also, in the fourth bar on the last page, page 360, the left hand goes down as far as B and B flat, 3 spaces below the stave. The right hand part is quite tricky, with a subtle syncopated rhythm and lots of accidentals. Even when you've made sure you can read the notes correctly, you'll find it's a real test of your technique to play them accurately at full speed. As usual, start by practicing slowly, and don't try to put the right hand together with the left until you've thoroughly got the hang of them both. It's best at first to play along with the backing tape with one hand at a time. Try the left hand first, and then the right. Only when you're really confident, put the 2 hands together with the backing as well. Mr. Smith is great fun to play, and with careful practice and a bit of patience, you'll eventually be able to make it sound like this. Finally, here's the backing only.